Doodlebomb here, and a while back I showed you guys how I made a productivity timer that was Uncharted themed, of course, using Scratch, called Uncharted Doro. And I figured it was time for me to try and bump up my programming skills a little bit more and make a little video game in Scratch with no help at all. And so what that means is, what I'm about to show you is probably not the best way, and definitely not the only way to make an endless runner in Scratch, but it is the way that I came up with, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, so let's get into it. Alright, so as you can imagine, the endless runner I made is Uncharted themed, and I just called it Uncharted Runner. So let's just do a little preview of how it works. So, we've just got Nate running here, a little simple animation, and he's dodging the rocks. Each rock he dodges, he gets a point, and if you jump too late, like I did that time, you get a game over. So, let's go ahead and take a look inside. Instead of just rebuilding this whole game in front of you guys, I'm just going to talk through a little bit of the pieces that went into it, and if this seems like something you would want to make, I'm going to post it on Scratch, and you'll be able to look inside and you can see exactly these same things that I'm talking about right here. So the first thing I did was I made a little Nathan Drake in Scratch, and he turned out pretty cute. So at first I only had one appearance for him. This was the very first costume, just because you always think of Nate as running and jumping. And I just used these little tools up and around here, mostly this guy, just to draw and pick colors and all that stuff. This is the first little drawing I did. I was just kind of messing around in here, and he turned out to be pretty cute, so I thought maybe I ought to make this little game. So this is the first one. This is like that in-between step when you're running. So it'll go in this order where he'll run like this, and then that. And so he's going to keep looping through those three until you hit the space bar, which is jump, and then he'll make this little animation here. So that is all the animating that really went on in this at all. Everything else is just the same drawing but moving. And so this actually, making the animation work, I waited till the very end to make that work. So, but as you click on each one of these different things down here, you'll be able to see the coding behind it. And so the first thing I had to do was really set it up to where he will load correctly into the screen consistently, and so that gets reset every time you hit the stop button. So say you die here, it stops. If you hit green, it restarts him, so you don't get just stuck in the same spot over and over again. So the way I did that was, when clicked, I set the rocks dodge counter, this guy up here, to 0, set jump to 0, go to 75x and -27y, and that's how he starts in this middle spot every time. It's making that setting. And then additionally, I like to show the costume that I want him to start on, just because sometimes it would look a little bit wonky if I didn't explicitly tell it to start with that one and he died mid-jump or something. So like when I very first started, I didn't have it, so whenever he would die mid-jump, he would just keep raising when it would restart. And you can die mid-jump if you are coming back down on top of the rock, if you're wondering how that happened. So, if we're looking at the code, we'll just talk through it now. And you read code, and the computer reads code from top to bottom, but I tend to find when I'm building code, I usually build in the middle and out. So, the first thing I had to do was I didn't even have these at the very beginning, because those to me were just aesthetics. So this big chunk here is just saying, if he's at this height, switch to this costume, wait half a second. If he's still at that height, switch to this costume, wait half a second. If he's at this height, switch to this costume. So all that this chunk of code does is what makes Nate look like he's running. It's just switch costume, switch costume, switch costume. And then if he's at a different height, then we tell it to switch a different costume. And the way I ended up doing that was, instead of detecting the height, the only way that he was going to increase or decrease the Y value is if you tell him to jump. And so all I did was, when space key is pressed, change jump by 1. Then switch costume to 3, because 3 is the jump costume. Then change Y by 60, so that's how he gets height. Wait 1 second, that's why he kind of floats in the air, and then he goes back down -60. So since these are the exact same, only one's positive and one's negative, that is what allows Nate to jump back and go exactly where he's supposed to be so that the costumes can continue changing to allow him to run. The last little bit of code here that applies to Nate specifically is game over. And so I have another code over by on the rock sprite that will broadcast dead if something happens. And so in this, if it receives the signal dead, that means put game over up. And that's it. So that's all of the coding for Nate. So the coding for the rock is actually what I had the hardest time with. This is really the main mechanic of the game. While there is coding and movement on Nate's, it's really just movement and costume changes. This is the mechanic, the game loop. And the whole rest of the game depends on this working correctly. So I'm still very new to programming, and I also was refusing to look things up to figure this out. So it was all trial and error. And so I figured, what is the simplest way to make an endless runner? A lot of endless runners, you actually are populating the background and as it changes, and it can be random and all kinds of awesome coding you can do here, but I don't know how to do that. So for me to make a simple endless runner was to just make the main character look like he was running and give him an obstacle to dodge. And the way I ended up doing that was to create a rock, tell that rock to move, clone that rock, and then delete the original rock. So that's all that this code is doing. So first, when clicked, the rock exists and we show it. And then he starts moving. So when you click a button on here, that's when you can make stuff show up. So when green is clicked, we first put the rock in this location and then it shows it. And then we have a forever loop. The first step of this forever loop is just checking. So if the distance to sprite 2, which is Nate, is less than 100, broadcast dead. So that's saying 100 is kind of the bubble, or would be considered a collision box for Nate. So 100 or less, well, 99 or less, that means he's dead, he's too close. If that has not happened, this condition isn't met, then we go to the else statement. So if it's less than 100, he's dead. So if it's greater than 100, then that means we can keep doing this. So if it's greater than 100 and the distance is greater than 0, which means we're not stuck on him, then change x by 6. So that is entirely how it looks like he's moving. The rock looks like it's moving, is because it's looking to see, am I within 100 of Nate? If not, I'm going to move 6, and move 6, and move 6, and move 6. And that's all this does, is it keeps checking for if it's too close, and moves by 6. And if the position's greater than 290, then broadcast end, change rocks dodged by 1, and hide that image, and stop this script. And that just means this script here. So what that means is, the side of the screen over here, that's 290x. So if he is past 290, then that means that, and this code is still running, that means that the player successfully jumped over the rock while it was moving. In which case, that means we should increase the rock's dodge counter. The character didn't die. That means this rock is now on the edge of the screen, so we're going to hide it, and we're going to stop the script. Now when it receives the end, this is the important part of that, when it's broadcast end before we stop the script. Because if we broadcast end after we stop the script, that means that it will never broadcast it. So it goes past, you've dodged it, now we broadcast end. This guy over here is waiting for the end signal. Once it receives it, it spawns a new rock, and that's all it does. So it's the exact same code as over here, but it's waiting until this one says it's done. And the reason I did that is because if I just had it reach a certain point and spawn another one without it waiting for a signal, it just kept spawning them over and over and over and over again until it was impossible to dodge them all. So that's how this code works here. Now the rest of the code is kind of just for fun parts, but I'll go ahead and show it to you anyway because I do feel like it helps complete part of the image. We have a rock that moves, and we also have a background that moves, and we have clouds because I do want it to look like an endless runner. So the background is going to change while he's doing things, otherwise he's not going anywhere. And if you look, the background moves at a different pace than the rock, and that's called parallax. Just like the clouds move slower than the background, so you're always going to see more rocks in a certain number of frames, then you'll see the background, then you'll see the clouds. And then I put these vines up here in the front just because I liked having that little bit of foreground. And so this is how I got this parallax looking thing without actually creating an enormous game level. So to make this moving background to give kind of more depth to the game, I essentially reused a large majority of the sprite logic for the rock and just took away the parts that would actually kill Nate. So it's still sensing Nate because Nate is kind of our focus, and that's kind of the point of like that the movement is going in relation to. And so we check this number, it keeps going, we change by 2. If X is greater than 380, then broadcast grow. So broadcast grow is the equivalent of broadcast end for this rock. They just couldn't use the same number because the rock moves at a different speed than the tree does. So if I use the same signal, A, then the rock one would always be spawning whenever the tree ended, and B, the more trees would be spawning whenever the first rock ended. So you can see why that would be a little bit complicated. So we went with a different word, and I just picked grow because I associate that with trees. So same logic, it checks for distance, it moves once it gets past a certain distance, and this one I wanted to go completely off screen. Then it broadcasts grow to initiate this one, to start a new one. Then we hide it, and then we delete this clone. And that's how we get this to work. So it just keeps going, and these keep going back and forth until Nate dies. So I also have just this little bit of code here where it says when I receive dead, stop. And that's because if Nate died and the background kept moving, that would imply that his dead body was still moving, even though he can't dodge obstacles, and then the obstacles also stop moving. So it would be pretty weird. There was probably a better way that I could have coded this part, because I have to have, for every script to stop, I have to have this little bit of code when it says dead. So in here, if it says when I receive dead, then we have game over and it stops the script. And this one, if it receives dead, then we stop the script. We receive dead, we stop the script. This one doesn't have any coding because he just hangs out and he doesn't move. But you can see why when I receive dead, then we show this sprite as well. So there's probably a better way that could be coded to where, I don't know, where when something initiates dead, it could probably stop all the scripts. I just don't actually know how to do that in Scratch. Or honestly, maybe in life, I don't know. But I could probably figure it out. But again, I was making this project and refusing to look up how to do anything. And so then we have this script here for the cloud in the background. And that's just duplicating the script, essentially. But if you look, you'll notice that I'm only changing X by 1. And this is how we get the parallax effect, because the cloud only moves by 1 unit with each run through of the code. The tree only goes by 2 units or 1.5 units whenever it's moving. And then the rock, which is the fastest thing, goes 6 units of X at a time. And so that's how we get the different layers of speed and how we get that distance, or what appears to be distance, in the game. And the last little bit of code is just the game over. So when clicked, we hide it, So technically this little thing is up at all times. We just don't show it until it receives the signal that says dead, and it shows game over. So now that we know how it works, we can just do a little preview again and play this guy. 1 full second of float is kind of a little bit long. I might tweak on that. I could also make it to where we get shorter jumps as the game goes on, or potentially increase the speed of the rock. And I could do that in a way like, if rocks dodged is 30, spawn a second rock, and then start that script. And that would be a way to kind of create more levels in the game, or a longer play experience that isn't, I mean, kind of boring, honestly, after a little bit. It's just the exact same thing. But I'm actually really happy with how it turned out, and I think it turned out, I mean, he's pretty cute. And I definitely learned a lot, and I definitely got stuck in some forever loop bugs where I would just have rocks spawning continuously, or Nate would just die as soon as I started. And so this was a really good learning experience, just trying not to look anything up and just playing with it. And I feel like I really learned how some of the forever loops and if-else statements really worked, because I was making it crash all the time. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm pretty happy with this little project, and I've got another game project I'm already working on, and it's called Wave Raider, so keep an eye out for that. You might have already seen how my little board back here says it, if you happen to notice the background in some of my other videos. And that one's going to be a more fully fleshed out game, because I want to improve on this. But I'm not going to be using Scratch anymore. I am going to be growing up and using Godot, and I want it to be a full game in the sense that I want it to have a start menu, a pause menu, an options menu, and volume controls, and maybe some more different sort of difficulty levels that you can do. Maybe not more levels, but ways that you can create it to be more difficult for yourself and more challenging, but within the same gameplay realm. You'll get it when you see it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you later.